Audio test 1, 2. Interpreters, can you please do a sound check on the English channel, please? Thank you.
This is a sound check for English. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Sound check, check, check. Sound check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Just tell me if it was okay. Sound check, check, check. Sound check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Sound check, check. Sound check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sound check, 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 sound check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Sound check. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So today we are in Ottawa. It's about -12 outside. Not too bad. We still don't have any snow. Looking good. Sound check, 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 sound check.
That was
Sound check.
perfect. We can hear you very
In the
clearly.
French?
Thank you. Can
Oh,
you
how
please
about the
do a
French? Do you
check
want to
on
do the French?
channel? Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready to start. All right, good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Welcome to this morning's Audit Committee meeting. It's great to see everyone here, whether you're joining us in person in the Champlain Room or at 110 Laurier or virtually on Zoom. We are glad to see you here. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement, and then we're going to be amending our agenda. So as we begin our meeting today, I wish to acknowledge that Ottawa is built on unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation and honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. All right, so as I said, we're going to amend this agenda. We're going to add an item 5.2, which was previously a confidential report. When we add it, and I'm going to look to Vice Chair Brown to move the motion, the report will be live on the Auditor General's website, which would be oagottawa.ca under reports, investigation reports. Vice Chair Brown? Sorry, we need to do roll call. Councillor Carr, you were worried about that? We'll get you down. You are here. I could see that. All right, roll call. Thank you.
Councillor Hill,
Present.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Present.
Councillor Carr,
Ici.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Hubley,
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
We have quorum, Chair. Vice Chair Brown, sorry.
Here.
And Chair Curry.
Here. We're big on process this morning. Okay, for the added item to the agenda, Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Whereas the report and supporting documents for item 5.2 titled Office of the Auditor General Fraud Investigation Report was not circulated with the agenda package. Therefore, be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of these documents for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to Section 89(3) of the Procedure Bylaw 2022-410.
All right, is that item carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Okay, so a little bit of procedural challenges this morning for sure. Before we proceed, I also need to do the declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest for this agenda? Seeing none. So we have, I'm just going to explain to you the way this whole agenda is going to roll. So now that we have an added item, our first item still is going to be the 2024 KPMG financial statement audit plan. Staff from KPMG will give us a presentation of about 10 to 15 minutes. Next, we'll hear a presentation on the 2025 draft operating and capital budget from Isabel Jasmine, Deputy City Treasurer and Auditor General Natalie Goujon. This will be a shorter presentation, about 5 to 10 minutes. Once that's done, we'll open the floor to questions. For questions to staff, starting with committee members, followed by any other members of council who may be present. If you're joining us virtually and responding to questions, we'd appreciate it if you could turn on your video, bandwidth permitting. After that, we'll hear from the Office of the Auditor General. We'll learn from the OAG about the new global audit standards in a presentation by Sarah Parr, Audit Principal. This should take about 7 minutes and we'll follow the same format for questions. We'll then vote to carry the report and recommend that council consider and approve that report. And then we will move to the item we just added. Okay, so now let's get started with our first item. So first thing is we have the minutes from the Audit Committee meeting from September the 20th, 2024. Are the minutes noted on the agenda confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed, thank you. And now we move to the Finance and Corporate Services Department for the 2024 KPMG Financial Statement Audit Plan. Our auditors are online. They ordinarily would not have been, but because we had to move this item a week, move this agenda and meeting a week, now they have to unfortunately be online with us. But nonetheless, here we go. Andrew and Kevin?
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure if you wanted me to go or not, Madam Chair.
Yes, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
I'll
and
just-
we are ready for you.
Okay, I
whenever
wasn't
you
sure
are.
if staff was going to go first. Sorry about that. And thank you for allowing us to do this virtually. As we mentioned in our pre-call, my wife had surgery, hip surgery, on Saturday at the Ottawa Hospital. So things are going well, and I have to say we are blessed with the healthcare that we have in the city through the Ottawa Hospital and the other hospitals as well. I
Great
have
to hear,
with me,
Andrew.
thank you. I have with me Kevin Travers, my co-engagement partner, also virtually, and as well Ines Grubasek, our manager on the file this year. So if we can just go to the next page. Right, so just it does seem like it's a bit of a cast of thousands to do an audit these days, but for an entity as complex as the city, that is what is needed. So these are the 6 partners that are involved. So I mentioned myself and Kevin at the top. We also have Rebecca Profit, who is a local partner here in Ottawa, who helps us with that. Katie Denbach is what we call the Engagement Quality Control Review partner. She is out in our London, Ontario office, and she does a final read of the financial statements and audit plan and audit findings report as a second set of eyes on that. In addition, as you know, the information technology is a big part of the financial statement audit, and that part of the audit is led by Wayne Darling. And as well, your employee future benefits is also looked at by an actuarial partner by the name of Greg Winston. If we can go to the next page. So audit highlights. And I'll just cover the ones that we don't have further slides on. So bottom right-hand corner, the areas of that we are going to focus on, a long bullet list there. Auditing is not rocket science. We look at those items that are large or those that are susceptible to change. So certainly things such as revenue, tangible capital assets, expenses, accounts payable, long-term debt. Those are very significant to the city. And as you at the very bottom, asset retirement obligations, I'll note that was the new standard last year, and that standard will continue, and that's an estimate of the liability to remediate the various properties of the city when they're no longer in service. I'll actually just go to the next page, I think. So group audit scoping. So this is really just a reminder. There's a lot of words on this page, but this is just a reminder to the members that Hydro Ottawa is included within the city's financial statements on what we call an equity basis. So you'll see an investment in Hydro, and as well as the dividend is recorded. KPMG is also the auditors of Hydro Ottawa, so this makes this quite easier for us than if it was 2 different firms. And it just shows that the various assets in there. So those are the 2 significant components. I will also just remind the council that we do also audit the 20 BIAs of the city as well separately, although they don't really make a lot of, they're not a big part of the revenues or the assets of the city. So I'll go to the next page, please. So significant risks. So there are 3, and 2 of them relate to fraud, and I don't want to worry the council too much on that. These 2 are mandatory to think about it and possibly do work around. The first one is management override of controls, and there is a presumed fraud risk in every single audit done in Canada, regardless of size of entity, regardless of industry, that there is a risk that the financial statements themselves may be materially misstated due to fraudulent activity. So how do auditors respond to this risk? We do procedures such as testing of journal entries, performing retrospective review of estimates just to make sure that the entity is not biased one way or the other, too aggressive, too conservative. We look at significant unusual transactions to make sure that they are that there's a business rationale behind them, and we also look at that we have all the journal entries, and we also actually do various interviews with key management staff, and including the chair of this committee, which actually happened last week. I'll go to the next slide. The second risk that we have is the consolidation process. As mentioned, we mentioned that the hydro is part of the city, but also the community housing and a few other entities are included within the city's financial statement. So the consolidation process, the way the city works, you are complex. You have various large activities that would be significant in their own right, such as transportation, such as police, such as health services. So the consolidation process is quite involved, and that increases the risk that there could be a mistake made in that consolidation process. And all that means is that we do more work there to make sure that the consolidation process is performed appropriately, and that the ending consolidated statements do accurately reflect the activities of all the cities activities. So that's the one the one non-mandatory significant risk that we have. The third one, which is please move to the next slide. The next significant risk that we do need to think about is the presumption of the risk of fraud involving improper revenue recognition. Now, this is rebuttable, and we do rebut this in being that this is more for public companies, that have revenue expectations where you listen to the radio in the morning going into work, if you still go into work, and you hear that, the revenue expectation for the bank of whatever is XYZ this quarter. The city does not have revenue expectations in that same vein where you have an investment analyst looking at that. So there is not a incentive for the city to manipulate its revenue in its financial statements itself. So I'm not saying you don't look at revenue, certainly, but there is not an incentive there to manipulate revenue to get a higher stock price or bonuses or anything like that. So we rebut that fraud risk for the city. I'll go to the next slide. So newly effective accounting standards. I mentioned the audit retirement obligations that was new last year. There are actually 3 that are new this year, and as I mentioned before, I was vice chair of PSAB, so you can actually blame me for these one last time. The 3 are, and I won't do them in order. I'll do them in the reverse order of importance. So the first is purchased intangibles. So this is a relatively simple change where entities are now allowed to record intangibles that they purchase. Probably not relevant for the city. Think of fishing licenses as an example of things that you may purchase in those areas near the ocean. Revenue, we are not anticipating any significant impacts on revenue. This is a standard that relates to non-tax, non-government transfers revenue, such as building permits, dog permits, things such as that, fines. It's really just providing clarity for past practice. So we're not anticipating any change, certainly no material change from this standard for the city. But it is now in the book, and your management team's going to look through to see if any minor changes are needed, but we are not expecting anything significant there. The third one is public-private partnerships, which gives clarity and consistency on how entities in the public sector will record liabilities and assets related to public-private partnership. It is quite a complex standard. Your management team is working with us on how those will be recorded, and if there are any changes, we'll report back to this committee in May. I do anticipate there will be some. The fortunate thing is the standard does allow pretty much what I'll call prospective application or retroactive without restatement, which means we don't have to restate last year's numbers. We just need to do it on a go-forward basis with the public-private partnerships that are in place currently. I'll go to the next slide, which is the last slide. So the milestones. So the nice thing is being the second year we are here earlier than last year. Last year, I think we did our audit plan in February, which made the audit challenging from a timing perspective, both on our side and on your management team side. But I will once again give kudos to your management team and in their participation getting it done in a short turnaround. You will notice things have been accelerated in the audit. September, October, we did our planning and risk assessment, which is reflected in this plan. Last month, this month, and next month, we continue that risk assessment, but get into interim work. And there's two parts of that interim work that is important to this committee. First is around information technology and controls. We are hopeful that we will have all of that testing done by the end of January so that we can move forward on that basis, that we know the controls are working effectively or that they're not. In addition, the interim work includes a lot of substantive testing of transactions in the early 9-10 months of the year. So those should be done by the end of January as well. What that does is it relieves that pressure from mid-April to the end of May that your team feels when the year-end audit field work happens, and we're dealing with broader issues and financial statement reporting and consolidation, things like that. So we are very hopeful that this will be a much better process than the prior year, simply due to the fact that we were able to get started now and not in the new year. With that, Madam Chair, Kevin is here as well. I only see 5 of you on my screen, so I'm hoping that Kevin has come on in video as well. But I will pass it over to you for questions to either of us.
Thank you very much. All right, committee members, questions for KPMG and/or staff. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Andrew.
Hello,
Let's hope
Councillor.
your wife has a speedy recovery.
Thank you.
I was curious about OCH because it's under the umbrella of the city, but it also gets audited separately. So it actually goes through 2 audits. Is that correct?
So OCH, Ottawa Community Housing. So yes, it is a consolidated entity. It is actually not as big as Hydro. So it's not. It's what we call a component, but not a significant component. So we do look at the statements and the results of that audit, but not to the same level of extent as Hydro.
Okay, because it does get its own audit.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. All right. What about the expenses for stage 2 with Kev, the P3? Is that part of?
Yes. Sorry. I'm sorry. Frog in my throat here. Yes, certainly all of your transportation expenses, but certainly the expenses for the new line are included in the audit. Everything that is in the city is included in our audit. And was in prior years, the vouching of the cost, etc. The 3P standard is more around the future of, what is the obligation for the city for the services provided through the 3P, any 3P, quite frankly, and also who gets to record the assets. So there may or may not be a change to past practice, Councillor, on that. That work is currently being done.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I would also just add, sorry, Chair. We are quite fortunate here in Ottawa in our office. We actually have the chair of the task force that developed that standard in our Ottawa office by the name of Bailey Church. So we will be relying on his expertise to get this right for the city.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions, but I have a couple of questions and then I have something just to share. So one of my questions though is that, the 3P accounting standard, the retrospective component of it, how retrospective, like how far would we be expected to go back?
So it's retrospective without restatement. So you're going to identify the 3Ps agreements that are currently in place and determine how they would be accounted for in 2024. And then we're getting into very much accounting 101, Madam Chair here, but or not even 101, 401. So what that means is we would look at any 3P agreements that are currently in place as at Jan 1, 2024, and look at the accounting around them. You don't have to go back to ones that might have been 3Ps in the past and have been closed, but we also don't have to go back and say, well, how would it have been recorded in 2023, 2022, 2021? We do a start at 2024.
Okay, great.
So,
The asset retirement obligation standard, I guess, or I don't know if that's a standard or what we were talking about last year and other years. Is that anything that was significant in this year's financial statements that councillors would need to understand better?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, Madam Chair. I apologize for that, but yes, it was a significant amount of a liability that is recorded and actually presented in a single line on your financial statements. But it was a fair bit of work as well, but also it was a significant liability over the years. And what that is it is an estimate, so it's determined through present value concepts and things such as that on how much it will cost to remediate and maintain the sites of the city that have contamination in post coming out of use.
Thank you for that. And that question to staff as well. Is there anything else you feel that councillors need to understand better about the asset retirement obligation?
No, there's nothing really significant about it. It wasn't a material amount. I'm trying to find the number myself. I've got the financial statements up. If I find it, I'll let you know. But I think it was around 60 million at the most. And it's a future liability.
Okay. I'm sure we'll hear about it in future then. One of the comments I just wanted to make was that as chair of the audit committee, you have to have an interview with KPMG to say, are you aware of fraud and risk? You know, what do you think the city has in place for fraud and risk? Of course, my answer was the fraud and risk hotline, which we're going to be talking about a lot today in our extra item. And then the other was, we talked a little bit about any other risks I felt that we had. And, you know, because I sit on Hydro Ottawa and I see what their enterprise risk management system is like and how they roll, I had said to Andrew, you know, I feel there's a lot from Hydro Ottawa that the city could be more aware of. And so he just shared with me that that is something that could happen at Audit Committee, where we were able to hear from Hydro Ottawa almost as a little bit of a comparison in terms of how they run enterprise risk management or how they run other things that maybe the city could learn from. So I thought I would share that with the Audit Committee, that might be something, that certainly would be something I'd like to see. I'd like to see the expertise at Hydro Ottawa come and share with the Audit Committee what they do, because it is impressive. The one other question I have for Andrew is that, you know, we have an extra item on the agenda here. Are you aware of it yet, or have you read the report that we are about to add?
I have not read the report or received the report. However, this morning your Auditor General did reach out for a meeting this week. So, and that is perfectly appropriate from a protocol perspective.
Great. Well, maybe we might hear from you again after that. Okay, so do I see any other questions? No other questions on the financial statements. Committee members, is this item received?
Received.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrew and Kevin.
Thank you.
Good luck to your wife and her healing.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Our next item is the 2025 draft operating and capital budget. Isabel.
And the asset retirement obligations were 76 million. For presentation. Thank you, Chair. So I'm joined today by Joanne Gorenstein, Deputy Auditor General, and we are presenting the draft budgets within the responsibility of the Audit Committee for 2025. There are two budgets within the Audit Committee's responsibility: the Office of the Auditor General's budget and the External and Special Audits budget, which is managed by myself in Corporate Finance and the Finance and Corporate Services Department. We will present the operating budget summaries for each and provide some of the key highlights within each budget. Slide. Oh, next slide. The total operating budget within the responsibility of the audit committee is 3.5 million, with recoveries of 300,000 for a net requirement of 3.2 million. As mentioned earlier, it includes both the operating budget of the Office of the Auditor General and the finance budget for external and special audits. The overall increase in the budget is 3.9% or 120,000, and there are no increases in FTEs. I will now pass the presentation to Joanne for a summary of the Office of the Auditor General budget.
Next slide, please. Good morning. I will very briefly walk you through the Office of the Auditor General's budget for 2025. Next slide, please. As you can see from this slide, our office has been allocated 2.9 million for 2025. This is 100% attributable to delivering on our work plan. Salaries and benefits is for our internal team, and the materials and services relate to professional fees for expertise and additional resources to deliver on our audits and investigations, including the administration of the fraud and waste hotline. There are also costs allocated to ensure our staff continue their professional development and maintain their audit-related certifications. Next slide, please. For 2025, our office has been allocated a budget increase of $90,000. This is consistent with the overall corporate increase and similar to previous year. We have seen a growing need for additional resources for audit and investigation services from our office. However, we do acknowledge the financial pressures that the city is facing, and we do believe that this budget allocation is sufficient for delivering on what we have committed to in our work plan. Thank you.
Slide. Next slide. So this table summarizes the operating budget for external and special audits. The total is 602,000 with recoveries of 254,000 for special audits, with a net requirement of 348,000 for the external audit of the city's financial statements. Next slide. There are 602,000 budgeted for all external audits coordinated by the finance department. The financial statement audit includes all the consolidated entities of the city of Ottawa, including the audit of the BIAs, Ottawa Community Lands, Legacy Pension Plans, and the Sinking Fund. 254,000 of the 602,000 is recovered from other entities, departments, programs, or projects that also require assurance and non-assurance audits. Examples include transfer payment agreements with the provincial and federal governments, such as the LRT funding agreements, long-term care, public health, in-house waste collection, Ontario Works, and legacy pension plans, some of which require their own audited financial statements. That concludes our presentation, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have with the 2025 budgets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to go to Vice Chair Brown for the roadmap motion, and then we'll go to questions. Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you, Chair. That the Audit Committee recommend that Council, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Audit Committee 2025 draft budget as follows. 1. Operating resource requirement, Office of the Auditor General, page 2. Number 2. Operating resource requirement, external and special audits, page 4.
Thank you very much. All right, questions for staff and the Auditor General. Councillor Kavanaugh and then Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the budget. You were mentioning that the budget is limited, just like everything else here. But I guess the concern is have you had to turn down audits based on the fact that there was a lack of budget? And so how do you prioritize the audits?
Chair, thank you very much for the question. When we establish our audit work plan, we go through a pretty rigorous risk assessment. It involves various different factors. And obviously, as you're aware, we come to audit committee if there's ever something of greater priority that comes to our attention. So are there audits that we aren't doing as a result of resources? Most definitely, but we do try to prioritize the most important elements to ensure that we are providing the greatest amount of value with the resources that we are provided. Sometimes
you have to come to committee with the fact that you need more. Obviously we're stuck at a certain percentage that our budgets have increased. I'm just wondering how you can go about it, getting extra funds, but it concerns me if there's audits out there that need to be done, and are worthy. I'm just trying to figure out how we can get you more funds, like every other department here. But I think there's a certain importance to keeping an eye on everything. So I guess I'll leave it at that because you can't really answer that, but it just leaves me wondering. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. And I think this is an opportunity to thank your office, Madam Auditor General, for all the great work that you do. For about $3 for each resident in Ottawa, we see the value every few months when you come and report to committee. Can you tell the committee some of the ways that you maximize your budget so you can undertake additional audit functions? Because I know the chair and I get more information than most members of Audit Committee, but I think there's a good story to be told here.
Well, thank you for the question, Chair. I actually kind of have to ponder that because I think there's probably 1,000 different ways that we try to maximize the value that we bring. I think first and foremost, as I just mentioned, we conduct a risk assessment to ensure that the audits that we are selecting are providing the most amount of value. We're trying to link those back to the strategic priorities that Council has established. And as you may be, or you may recall, we also had a survey that we conducted with members of the public to understand what it is that they were hoping that we would take a look at as well over this 2-year audit work plan that we've established. So we try to ensure that we are providing the most value to the stakeholders. With regards to how we utilize the funds that we do have, Joanne mentioned to you a little bit of, obviously we have our salaries and benefits, but within that we have our professional services. So where appropriate, we bring in subject matter experts to assist us, whether it be with the conduct of an audit or investigation, to ensure that we're providing the best recommendations that we can to management and make sure that they're feasible to be implemented.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
All right, I don't see any other questions. So are the roadmap motion and this item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay. Thank you. That takes us now to the Office of the Auditor General new global audit standards. Sounds very exciting.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Audit Committee. The first report we would like to present today relates to the new global audit standards. Next slide, please. As you may recall, the Auditor General bylaw requires the OAG to conduct its audits in accordance with the Institute of Internal Auditors International Standards for the Professional Practice of Auditing, and changes to these standards from time to time, except requirements applicable to consulting services. On January 9th, 2024, the Institute of Internal Auditors released new global internal audit standards, including 26 net new requirements and 118 enhancements, which take effect on January 9th, 2025. We have conducted a detailed assessment of our policies and practices against the new standards to identify potential gaps and next steps. At a minimum, changes to the standards require updates to our policies, processes, and templates. More significant changes to the standards, some of which are outlined on the next slide, require the introduction of new processes and new technology. Next slide, please. This slide identifies some of the more significant new requirements and changes to the standards. I will briefly outline how we intend to address each of them. First requirement being that audit reports must communicate the significance and prioritization of audit findings. The OAG will leverage an existing prioritization scale that was used for its most recent audit on cybersecurity. This, however, does add an additional element of complexity during our reporting. Another requirement is that themes across multiple engagements related to the city's governance, risk management, and control processes must be communicated in a timely manner. To address this new requirement, thematic issues will be identified as part of our annual report. Another requirement is the Auditor General must discuss what the standards refer to as essential conditions with the Audit Committee and where appropriate senior management. The essential conditions establish the foundation for effective dialogue between the Audit Committee, the Auditor General, and where appropriate senior management concerning the OAG's mandate, audit charter, independence, support, resources, and quality assurance. Yet another requirement, the OAG must use technology to improve its effectiveness and its efficiency. In addition to integrating technology within the performance of our audits, we have consulted with information technology services to identify technology solutions that would enhance the office's effectiveness and efficiency. Technologies already in use at the city are currently under review for their ability to automate audit workflows and data-driven reporting at little or no additional cost. For audit recommendations that are overdue, yet another new requirement, management will be required to sign off, indicating that they have accepted the associated risk. Communication about this risk acceptance will be included in our semi-annual report on audit follow-up procedures. Next slide, please. The Auditor General bylaw establishes the position and duties of the Auditor General and further outlines at a high level the responsibilities, accountability, and reporting requirements of the OAG. However, the bylaw does not outline more specific requirements regarding elements such as independence, conflicts of interest, and reporting on the OAG's effectiveness to the Audit Committee, which are required as part of the IIA standards. As such, in 2021, we established an audit charter to supplement the bylaw and ensure that all aspects of the standards were covered and communicated to the Audit Committee. This method allows for greater ease of change as the standards are updated. We committed to performing an annual review of the charter to ensure that it continuously reflects the IIA standards. Due to the introduction of the new standards, significant changes to the charter were needed this year, which is why we have brought a revised version for the committee's recommendation today. The OAG leveraged the IIA's model internal audit charter for the public sector as a starting point and customized it to reflect the OAG's unique operating environment. Next slide, please. If it pleases the chair, we would be pleased to take any questions committee members may have at this time.
All right, committee members, any questions on the charter? Riveting. I think that was an excellent presentation though, Sarah. We're sorry the subject matter is not as exciting for some. What's that? Yes, exactly. So now then, if there are no questions, we really just need to approve this report. So the report recommendation is that the Audit Committee recommend that Council approve the Office of the Auditor General's Audit Charter. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, so that brings us to the added item, the Office of the Auditor General, the Fraud Investigation Report. Natalie.
Good morning, Chair, members of committee. Our second presentation today relates to a fraud investigation my office undertook with the assistance of Ernst & Young. Joining us remotely today and assisting us in today's presentation is Steve Willa. Steve is EY's public sector leader for forensic and integrity services, and his practice is largely focused on the Canadian federal government in respect to various investigative and litigation matters. Steve is a chartered professional accountant, a certified fraud examiner, a chartered business valuator, and is also certified as an expert in forensic accounting by the Canadian and US CPA associations. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. I should also take a quick moment. I want to apologize in advance. This report is only published in English. We only have an English presentation. We will be translating those. Unfortunately, due to the confidentiality associated with this item, we did not put it through translation. So I do apologize for that. In 2024, my office received a report through the Fraud and Waste Hotline containing serious allegations of wrongdoing. The report alleged that a caseworker for the City of Ottawa, who we will be referring to today as Employee A, had received kickback payments from a group of landlords in exchange for these landlords receiving more favorable rental rates under specific housing benefit programs administered by the city. The kickback payments began in approximately January of 2024, although the landlords received more favorable rental rates as early as October of 2023. This group of landlords includes 4 individuals and 2 corporations, all of which are overseen by 1 individual, which we will be referring to collectively and individually as the landlord. Due to the significant nature of these allegations, I promptly informed the city solicitor, the city manager, the general manager of community and social services, as well as the Ottawa Police Service, and we commenced preliminary investigative procedures at that time. Following a discussion with the Ottawa Police Service, I formally launched a full investigation. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. The objective of our investigation was to review the allegations raised in the report received through the Fraud and Waste Hotline and determine whether or not they had merit. The scope of our investigation was limited to assessing those particular allegations and determining the appropriate course of action for each issue. However, to the extent possible that other control issues were identified and validated during the course of our investigation, we included those particular elements within our report as well. Although the allegations my office received are linked to housing benefit programs administered by the city, the scope of our investigation did not assess the effectiveness of these particular programs. As I mentioned, we procured the services of Ernst & Young to assist us in the conduct of this investigation. We also procured legal services of Aird & Barrellis for external legal support. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. During the investigation, I exercised the powers afforded to me under clauses 33A and B of the Public Inquiries Act, which enable me via summons to require persons to give evidence on oath or affirmation and to produce evidence, documents, and things required in support of our investigation. I exercised these powers to obtain banking records, records contained on personal devices, and testimonial evidence to support or dispute the allegations that were brought to our attention. As a result of the use of these powers, all individuals involved in or aware of the investigation were required to maintain confidentiality. I will now pass the presentation over to Steve to walk you through a few of our key observations.
Good morning, everyone. During the course of our investigations working with the City Auditor General, we observed a record of payments from the landlord in the housing benefits administered by the city to an employee totaling $22,000, and that was for the period of November 14th, 2023 to October 1st, 2024. Several of these payment records could be linked and referenced to specific units where the employee A had assisted the landlord in undertaking the role of employees A role at the city. We first interviewed employee A on October 3rd, 2024, and they stated that they were working for the landlord on a part-time basis, but had not disclosed this relationship to the city. This represents a breach of the city's employees' code of conduct. From our analysis and messages of employee A's mobile devices, we observed several messages between employee A and the landlord that would indicate that these payments were made by the landlord with the intention of utilizing employee A's role at the city to provide financial benefit to the landlord. One of these such messages is at the bottom of this slide, and I think this message actually quite clearly indicates what was going on in the circumstances. Next slide, please. Without limitation, information to justify the legitimacy of the payments we described on the previous page of our slide. The payments made by the landlord to employee A, we observed multiple factors that indicate that these payments would be consistent with a kickback scheme designed to provide a benefit to both the landlord and employee A. We observed employee A's family member, who was also a city employee, who we refer to as employee B, had knowledge of employee A's relationship with the landlord, and that was not disclosed or otherwise reported to the city. This is considered a breach within the city's code of conduct. We also observed that employee B was directly involved in collecting a payment from the landlord to employee A. Next slide, please. In addition, during the course of our investigation, another issue came to our attention, and that was the establishment of a moving company. We noted that employee B, related to employee A, and the landlord began operating a new moving business, which we refer to as the moving company. We observed the moving company was responsible for moving a housing client of employee A. We further observed that employee A submitted an invoice on behalf of the moving company, which was paid by the city for moving services rendered. We observed that employee B and the landlord both financially benefited from a portion of the profits from this transactions. We understand that employee A and employee B did not disclose their relationship with the moving company to the city, which is a breach of the city's code of conduct. I will now pass back the presentation to the Auditor General to discuss her office's findings related to the program, processes, and controls. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Steve. As Steve just mentioned, in addition to the findings he just walked through, we also undertook additional work to assess the impact on the city's housing benefit programs and processes. So first of all, we expected caseworkers to have a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities, and that would be supported by policies, processes, and training. So management has confirmed that caseworkers primarily obtain training upon hiring informally through their peers. No formal training program has been developed or implemented. This increases the risk of employees not clearly understanding their roles and responsibilities and inconsistently applying management's expectations. Next, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about their role with regards to rental agreements. Based on discussions with management, housing caseworkers are responsible for supporting clients with their housing search and securing a unit that they can afford at a reasonable cost based on rental market conditions. It is not the caseworker's responsibility to negotiate rental agreements on housing client behalf. During our investigation, we obtained evidence demonstrating that employee A was locating units and negotiating rental agreements on the housing client's behalf, which appears to be a breach of city process and represents a conflict of interest, taking into consideration that the payments that employee A was receiving from that specific landlord. Furthermore, we observed multiple instances where employee A assisted housing clients in entering into lease agreements, which significantly exceeded the average market rent for this area. You can see a few examples on this slide. We saw no evidence that employee A scrutinized these rental amounts as required. On the contrary, we observed evidence that would support employee A's involvement in the determination of the rental amounts. There is a possibility that such significant increase in rental amounts may have resulted in inflationary rental prices in these specific areas. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. As with all city programs, we would have expected that an established monitoring process was in place to review the reasonableness of housing program activities. Management has confirmed to us that compliance with program eligibility is reviewed. However, a monitoring process to ensure reasonability is not currently in place. Had a monitoring process of this nature been in place, management may have detected irregularities in these transactions sooner. Through a review of employee A's emails, we observed an email for one team member to the entire team, including their supervisor, raising concerns about the landlords trying to potentially maximize benefit payments by requesting rental rates above the advertised rate for specific units. This communication occurred only 2 weeks prior to the commencement of payments to employee A. As a supervisor had been made aware of these concerns, we would have expected to see appropriate steps implemented to guide staff and furthermore to detect potentially inflated rents. Through our investigation, we saw no evidence of such action being taken. Had adequate steps been taken following this email, including the establishment of a monitoring process, these may have deterred employee A and prevented this particular issue. I would also like to take a moment to highlight that in 2022, my office conducted an audit of enterprise risk management, which included a recommendation to develop an enterprise-wide fraud risk assessment. However, at the time of this report, this recommendation was still outstanding and is now over a year overdue. A fraud risk assessment may have highlighted the need for additional controls in this area that could potentially have prevented or detected this issue. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. During our investigation, we requested various reports to help us validate or disprove the allegations. We observed that data is manually tracked for housing benefit programs, and as such, aggregated data is not readily available. This data could have allowed management to implement a monitoring process, as we just discussed, increasing the likelihood that this behavior or other irregularities were detected sooner. We understand from management that they have a plan in place to implement a new system to address data availability issues and manual processes. As aggregated and timely reporting could not be provided to us by management, we were unable to perform systematic analyses such as reviewing other landlords or prior year's information. As a result of this, we were therefore unable to conclude on the pervasiveness of this issue. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Oh, sorry, my apologies. The last item I would like to speak to actually relates to the City of Ottawa's Code of Conduct training. The city requires that all of its employees complete the Employee Code of Conduct and Ethics training. This training is designed to be provided to new hires, and additional training is also provided to new supervisors and new managers. Through our investigation, we learned that some part-time employees, including employee B, had not completed the required Code of Conduct training. We also saw no evidence that employee B's supervisor had performed the required follow-up to ensure completion of this training. Incomplete training could result in employees not clearly understanding their roles, responsibilities, and obligations as a City of Ottawa employee. This also could increase the risk of inappropriate or unethical behaviors. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. In conclusion, we observed that employee A's undisclosed relationship and dealings with the landlord, including receipt of payments from the landlord, represent a breach of the City of Ottawa's Code of Conduct. Without information to legitimize the payments made by the landlord to employee A, we observed multiple factors that indicate that these payments are consistent with a kickback scheme designed to provide a benefit to both the landlord and employee A. We observed that employee B had knowledge of employee A's relationship with the landlord and did not disclose it or otherwise report it to the city. This also represents a breach of the City of Ottawa's Code of Conduct. In addition, we observed that employee B was directly involved with collecting payment from the landlord to employee A. We observed that both employee A and employee B's undisclosed relationship to the moving company and dealings with that moving company represent a breach of the City of Ottawa's Code of Conduct. And as I just described, we also identified gaps in city processes during our investigation. We made 6 recommendations and management agreed to all of them. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Overall, this investigation identified significant breaches of the city's code of conduct and internal processes. It also reinforces the importance of the City of Ottawa's fraud waste hotline and that it's working as intended. Our recommendations are aimed to address the initial allegations, improve overall controls, and reduce the risk of such instances from reoccurring. I would like to highlight that due to the confidentiality associated with this report, which was imposed on my office as well as management, that we were unable to communicate the results of our investigation to the Ottawa Police Service. I do want to let committee members know that now that this report has been tabled, that I do have a meeting scheduled with OPS this afternoon to speak to them about the results of this investigation, and I will be accompanied by the city solicitor as well. I would like to also take a moment to thank the various departments that assisted us in the course of this investigation. Usually we deal with a department or two, but in this case, it was a little bit of all hands on deck. So obviously Housing Services was a very key department that assisted us. I'd like to thank Bylaw Services. You'd be surprised, not everybody knows, but bylaw agents are actually able to sign a sworn affidavit of delivery. So they assisted us in delivering some of our summons. So on a very last minute request, so very much appreciated. Obviously legal services, I think Stuart probably doesn't want to see me anytime soon after all of this. Recreational and Facility Services Department, as well as the clerk's office. So if it pleases the chair, we'd be happy to take any questions committee members have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And really, thank you very much. This is not great, but thank God you are on it. Okay, so first questions are to the Auditor, Office of the Auditor General, and I'm going to Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam AG, for the presentation. Could you go into more detail about some of the lack of controls that you encountered during your investigation and some of those challenges that were introduced when you were trying to start and then work through the entire investigation?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think we've gone through most of them in quite a bit of detail, but I guess maybe if I just were to step back a little bit, one of the first steps we wanted to do was to look at this a little bit more holistically. When we get allegations, before we determine if we're going to start doing some work, we need to actually see, is there actually legitimacy to these? Is there a likelihood that we are going to find something here. The first thing we'd want to do is look at what's occurred. So we usually want to pull data. We want to take a look at it to see, are there any anomalies? Is there anything that we would flag as being unusual? And that would help us determine whether or not there's something for us to look at. So in the absence of that information, it was a little bit more difficult. Now, granted, we were able to substantiate the allegations, but in some instances, if we didn't have sufficient cause to, for example, I utilized the power of summons. I did so because I thought there was sufficient cause for us to move forward. I don't take those powers lightly. I've never utilized them before. It's the first time in almost 4 years of this mandate. So that lack of data was, and I should specify that lack of aggregated available data. The data is there, it's just manually maintained. So we would have had to recreate reports. And I didn't think that that was appropriate use of my team's time in order to get the answers we were looking for.
Thank you. And I'm assuming you haven't had a conversation with your counterparts in other municipalities, but would it be a fair assumption to say that other municipalities may have a system where they can collect this type of data? So if it is required, it's more easily accessible?
It's a very good question, Councillor, because we didn't dive into the information from an audit level perspective. We didn't do any benchmarking, so I'm not certain of what other municipalities currently have. Management may be better positioned to tell you what systems are in place.
Thank you. My last question, I'm assuming through this investigation, city staff complied and were helpful, and at any time that you required information, you received it to the best of their ability?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. This question is for the Auditor General, Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your work on this. It certainly shows the benefit of having a fraud and waste hotline, and much gratitude to you and your staff, and also to the person that called in to alert us to this. It does show that it works. It's a difficult read when you realize that we have people that not only take advantage of the system, but, take advantage of a system for their benefit and cut down on the amount of housing benefits available to the most vulnerable. I'll focus my questions just with respect to some of the observations that you made throughout the process. I noted that the fraud risk assessment you mentioned is a year overdue, but in the course of your investigation, did you note any evidence at all of any procedures or processes with respect to fraud risk assessment in place, whether there was any basic risk assessments or monitoring taking place, or any evidence of any controls? Or are we really at a level of maturity that is just really basic? Like, even though the fraud and risk assessment hasn't been completed, is there anything in your observations that struck you that perhaps we do have some basics in place?
So obviously our investigation was very limited scope, but what I would say is where we were looking to see specific monitoring or oversight related procedures, obviously we did not see them, which is why we've noted them in the report.
Okay, so basically no evidence in this particular case of any sort of elements of assessment. Just with respect to the program that you looked at, the housing benefit, my assumption was that this was the enhanced benefit allowance that we put in place as part of the transition out of the community center strategy, transition to housing strategy. Was it specific to the enhanced benefit allowance, or were there other housing allowances that were in place impacted as well?
Chair, this impacted multiple programs that the municipality administers, which are both provincial and municipal programs.
So it wasn't specific to the enhanced benefit. It could have been a whole range of programs. Did you have any concern about the way that those programs were administered in terms of financial authorities, delegated authorities, issuance of checks, anything that was abnormal in terms of how normally you would expect a financial program to be administered by the city?
So Chair, as I mentioned, the scope of our investigation was very limited. We didn't get to looking at the programs themselves, the effectiveness and the processes truly surrounding the programs. It was more so trying to find the root cause of the issue that was brought to our attention. So I can't really speak to those particular elements. I can state that a lot of these payments are not payments that go through finance. So it's a little bit of a different process where they go through housing services. So it is obviously something that we are open to taking a look at from a future audit perspective.
Okay, thanks. One thing that really struck me, and I'm sitting next to Councillor Brockington, is one of the apartments was listed as a 3-bedroom, normally retailing for about $2,500 a month, and it went for just over $4,000 in Ledbury, Herongate, Ridgemont. Ledbury is Councillor Brockington's, Herongate and Ridgemont are mine. You know, that's a huge difference. And I'm just wondering if you can break down a little bit the $22,000 in payments that were received from the landlord to employee A as bonuses. Like, that's a lot of money. Do we have any idea how many housing benefits, how many clients were impacted by this?
That's a very good question. And unfortunately, I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but I would say likely over 20.
So over 20 rental agreements where the prices were inflated that ate up additional costs that could have been spent on other people's housing.
I would say over 20 that were linked to the payments, going back to those that I would say are inflated. I would say it's closer to about 30 to 40% of what we noticed. Because there are some that could be deemed as appropriate. So in the sense of if something was $100, $200, or $300 in excess of what would be an average market rate, these programs are designed to ensure that we are getting housing clients into homes. So the program is designed to provide that flexibility to ensure those individuals are housed. So you'll see the examples that we provided. Those are where, to me, it is clear there is no judgment as to whether or not that is reasonable. Again, though, and I can understand staff's perspective on this, is what is reasonable when you are trying to house an individual that is in a shelter. So it was an interesting investigation for us to conclude on from that perspective.
Yeah, I certainly understand the balance between trying to hastily house someone against, you know, the monitoring and controls that we should have in place. Just with respect to I know I forgot my question there. I'll move to the next one. When you were, I understand that the scope of your investigation was limited to this particular incident, but did you note anything that you would recommend in terms of amending our current fraud policy? Like when I took a read through it, there were certain things that I felt weren't there, tools that were missing, for example, like guidelines for staff. Is there anything that you felt should be updated in our existing fraud policy as you went through this investigation?
Chair, Councillor, just to be clear, when you mean fraud policy, are you referring to the fraud and waste hotline policy?
Well, we have a 2005 policy, I believe. I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's what I read through that includes the whistleblower protection and includes mention of the hotline, all of that. Yeah.
Correct. So what I can tell members of council or committee, I should say, was in conjunction with the city manager's office, because that policy is owned by the city manager. I did provide some feedback with regards to areas for improvement there, and we've discussed them. And I think we're almost at a conclusion there. And I think the city manager wants, she doesn't know this, but I'm going to be recommending a couple of additional ones from our legal counsel that were made. But I believe that policy will be updated formally shortly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. And just, I think I'll save the rest of my questions for staff, but, and this is a bit of a larger question, but I know when we discussed the fraud and waste hotline previously, you know, we went through a time when, 40% of the inquiries were based on transit. Just, are you seeing a slowdown in terms of transit and more focus on cases, separate cases at all?
Chair, well, I would like to say we are seeing a change in trend. We are not.
Okay, thanks. I know that's a bit of a scope. Thank you again for all your work on this.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much. And yes, I'll join others in saying thank you for doing this, and thank you to the person who brought it to our attention. I realize the scope is what you're given. You must investigate, and you've done it thoroughly, and I appreciate that. it makes me wonder if it was done so easily, if there's others, and I'm concerned about that. Will there need to be follow-up just to check the process? You're talking about code of conduct for this, for staff, but, I just want to make sure we haven't missed anything and that we're looking at the overall process of how we function.
So Chair, as I mentioned, obviously we will be doing follow-up work on the results of the recommendations that we've issued to ensure that those improvements are made, and management is very open to those particular recommendations, and I believe they're already working on them. As I mentioned, we are considering the possibility of future audit in this particular area, which would have a wider scope, which may provide members of committee a little additional comfort in that area.
Thank you. And would that involve checking what other municipalities are doing?
Generally speaking, when we do conduct our audits, we do benchmarking with other municipalities to understand the best practices that are in place.
Yeah, okay, thank you. You will be meeting with OPS later. And obviously, the persons involved have been dismissed and will be liable to whatever the police decide. But what about the landlords? Because I'm feeling that they're very compliant here, and it really bothers me. When housing is so desperately needed, as chair of Ottawa Community Housing, I wish we had more and we wouldn't have to rely on these outside landlords, but there we are, where we need to house people. So what will happen to the landlords, most likely?
So as indicated in our report, we've recommended to management that all business relationship with the group of landlords, i.e. the landlord, is terminated, and management has agreed to that. And they have a transition plan that they are putting together to obviously ensure that it does not result in anybody being back into a physical distancing center or any form of shelter in the city. So this is going to be somewhat of a slow process. We're not looking to see people out on the streets. That is not the intention with that recommendation. It is to ensure that the city's reputation is kept intact, and that they are doing business with ethical individuals. With regards to any further action that can be taken, that is outside of my purview, which is why we are referring it to the Ottawa Police Service. And at that point, it is determinant on whether or not they take on an investigation, if they conduct a criminal investigation, the findings of that investigation, and then that'll be left to a court to decide.
Okay, thank you very much for all your work on this.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. I'm going in order of who's on the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple of questions for the AG, and then I'll follow up with staff on some more. You mentioned provincial and municipal money involved in this. Is there not federal money as well for the housing benefit?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. To my knowledge, these are specifically municipal and provincial programs, but I am not an expert in the programs, so management may be able to further confirm that.
Okay, I'll ask that question again after. Was there, if it's provincial money as well as municipal, was there no provincial requirement to have any kind of checks and balances on this money or verification of what was being done?
Chair, again, I will leave management to get into the details of that, because some of that is outside of the scope of our investigation with regards to some of these payments. As I'm sure committee members are aware, a lot of these benefits are determined in consultation with other benefits, such as Ontario Works payments, whether or not individuals have any form of income coming in. We did not look at those particular parameters and whether or not those were being followed and met, which is why you see in our report that management has indicated that those parameters have been followed and have not been breached. So I cannot speak further to that particular element.
But your own report says that they have no fraud detection plan or any risk assessment or any monitoring of the programs. As an auditor, did that not trouble you?
Most definitely. Most definitely, Counselor, yes, which is why we've raised it. And why we've also highlighted it as being one of the key elements in which could have detected these elements sooner, but also could have deterred the employee from actually taking these actions. When you know that your work is being monitored, you're less likely to take specific actions.
I would agree with you. The reference to the property market value being 2,500 and it being changed to 4,000. Does nobody have to sign off on that when you have an individual? Like clearly, in this case, someone is alleged to be trying to commit a fraud here. Is there no supervisor that has to sign off on something that's that much over market value?
So again, I'll leave management to get to the details of the program parameters themselves. But if I were to take, for example, the enhanced housing benefit allowance program, that one has a maximum of $1,800. So I do believe that there is a staff member that would review the eligibility for that particular $1,800. That doesn't mean that you might not have two individuals in receipt of $1,800 going into a two-bedroom, resulting in $3,600 being provided for that particular two-bedroom. Now that two-bedroom may very well have been rented on the market for $2,200, $2,300. So it is in that aspect, it is not breaching the program parameters per se, but from an individual who would who would see that and may question it. And I apologize, my staff has just corrected me. The enhanced housing benefit allowance is only for singles. So I would take that as, let's say it was $1,800 and that one bedroom perhaps could have been rented for $1,400. So you see a difference of $400. The COB, for example, that it could be a different situation where you see 2 or 3 bedrooms in particular.
Okay, and did I hear you correctly in your presentation that housing staff do their own checks? It doesn't go through finance?
Again, I'll let management walk through the details of that, but yes, there are specific, there's a provincial system that's separate from the city's financial system, and that's gone through housing services and not through the finance department. However, in a lot of instances, first and last month's rent are covered by municipal funds. So there's a couple different systems that are involved in these payments.
Okay, and I just have 2 more questions. You mentioned in your report that A and B are, did you use the term related or connected? There was some connection between A and B. What's the proper term for what you were using?
They are related via a family connection.
Family connection. And does that not breach any policy?
So the City of Ottawa has a requirement to disclose whether or not you have any family members that work and to ensure that there's no conflict between those 2 particular roles. And that is usually you have that established within, and it's in the city system. So something that we are usually able to see, that is a particular requirement. And then furthermore, if you have any form of outside business activities, you are also supposed to disclose that to the city and to your supervisor to then determine whether or not that could pose a conflict, whether that be an actual conflict or a perceived conflict with your actual duties here at the city.
Okay, thank you for that. Was there any record of that being done, or do you want me to ask management that question?
It's a very good question. I'd have to double check my notes. I do believe there was a familial connection in the system, but I can get back to you on that particular question.
Okay, thank you. And my last question for you was, I didn't see anything in here about how the city and the landlord are going to make the taxpayer whole for this. But clearly this is an abuse of tax dollars. And so was there any indication to you while you were doing this report that any effort to get the landlord to reimburse the taxpayer? And also the city is going to have to do something for its employees doing this. There's going to have to be some steps here to make sure that the taxpayer has confidence in this area.
So I think what's important to note is, at least to the best of our understanding, the payments that were made from the landlord to employee A were coming from the landlord's pocket. So that's one important aspect to understand. The area where the city would be out would be that, I say out, and again, this is subject to interpretation, is that delta between what we believe would have been a reasonable rent to enter into, and the total amount of the housing benefits that were paid. Now, there's, I guess, one caveat that I have to put on that is, and management's made this clear to us, and I understand that perspective, is the city cannot tell a housing client, you are not allowed to enter into that lease agreement because it's too high. You're supposed to be guiding that housing client to state that, it's above, the current rental market. You may be in a position down the road, it might be more difficult for you to sustain that payment. But if that housing client chooses to enter into that agreement and that it's still within the program parameters, at the end of the day, that part is a little outside of the city's hands based off of how the current program is designed. That is to my knowledge. Again, we didn't go through the extreme details of each particular program.
I just want to follow up on what you just said there. My understanding of your report is that the properties were often inflated, and I'm making an assumption here that I would think that you might have as well, that difference between the market rate and the inflated rate is where they both took their share of the pie, if you will.
I think that is a reasonable conclusion to make, yes.
So therefore, the taxpayer is at a loss here. That's where I'm going to with that. So I'll follow that up with management and see what efforts are going to be made to make the taxpayer whole. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, on the data, could you unpack that a little bit more? What data specifically were you looking for that was either missing or not readily available?
Well, to start off with, we would have liked to have seen reports by caseworker. We would have liked to have seen how many units or how many housing clients had they been assisting in a certain period of time. Were these 1, 2, 3 bedroom units? What landlords were they doing business with? You start seeing a trend if you start seeing one individual that's just working with one landlord, or if somehow you're looking at prior years and seeing a significant increase from, if one landlord had 50% of the units before and now they have 80% of the units that are utilizing these particular benefits, that may cause us to question. It doesn't necessarily mean there is something wrong, but it gives us an area where we might want to investigate and dive in a little further. When it comes to whether it be other caseworkers or other landlords that could be doing something similar, we would have wanted to look at trends and historical patterns to see that. And that may have guided us to do additional procedures, whether it be with other employees or other landlords. But in the absence of having that information and recreating it, we're not able to conclude in those elements.
Thank you. Given that this is such a high priority issue for the city, I'm surprised that we don't have those kinds of checks and balances, that kind of data available. And I think to Councillor Kavanaugh's point, I think all of us are concerned that, is this a one-off or is there others out there? How typical is it that your recommendations would be a year overdue on implementation? Is this kind of an anomaly or is this a concerning trend?
I think it varies. Obviously, we've done a lot of work with management with regards to our semi-annual follow-up reports that we bring forward. Management has been working fairly diligently in getting that list down. There are instances, and I know a lot of these as a result of pandemic and various other emergencies that the city has gone through, that it has caused some delays, and that has a trickle-down effect. But with regards to why that particular element is not complete, I would leave that to management to speak to.
Thank you.
I was going to go to Councillor Plante. I don't see you sitting at your seat there right now. Oh, there she is. Councillor Plante.
Merci beaucoup. Excuse-moi là. J'avais juste quelques questions. Attends, là, je vais les trouver.
Interpreters, sorry, the audio quality does not allow for a good interpretation.
C'est mon chien. OK. Je voulais juste savoir, dans les entrevues qui ont été faites, est-ce que vous
In the
pensez
different
que c'est un
interviews,
problème systématique à
do you
l'avenir
think
ou
this is
est-ce
a
que c'est
systemic
un
issue?
employé, un monsieur, un
Or it might be
locataire,
just one
propriétaire?
person, two
Quel est le
person?
feeling là,
What's your
de
gut
vos
feeling about
recherches?
that?
Merci pour la question, conseillère.
J'apprécie. Thank you for your question. Like I said,
L'information
because we didn't have all the reports needed, so we couldn't double check if there were some gaps. We're unable to provide you with a conclusion about that.
OK. L'autre question que j'avais, vous mentionnez employé A,
Conseillère
employé
Plante.
B. Est-ce qu'il y a une raison pour qu'on n'utilise pas
You
leur nom,
use employee A and B.
Oui, encore une très bonne question.
Answer?
Quand ça vient à
Good
des
question. I appreciate your question.
situations reliées
In some
à
cases,
RH,
because of human resources considerations, I don't want to put the city of Ottawa in a difficult position.
Je veux dire en anglais, désolé. I don't want to put the city at further risk of litigation. Puis à cause de ça, je voulais faire certain qu'on est capable de donner
So I want to make sure that we are able to provide information to the council while maintaining, reducing the risk.
OK, mais j'imagine que les noms vont être publics dans les recherches que
I
la
assume that
SPO
names will be made public at one point
au niveau de la police.
with the police of Ottawa.
Une très bonne question. À ce point-ci, j'ai le droit de partager les détails du rapport.
I can provide you with the details of the report, and I can now proceed with the police of Ottawa. I can't share details of the inquiry per se. Let's say I was able to get information through an interview. I'm going to go switch to language.
I am unfortunately only able to provide any further information that is not made public from this report if compelled to do so by the police. So I, as well as Auditor General, need to be summoned by the police to share that information. That is a standard requirement. I am reassured that apparently it is a very easy step for the police to take, but I can only share with them what I have made public in the course of my mandate.
OK. Et alors, j'imagine, parce qu'il y avait, on
The
a
interpreter is
mentionné
sorry, this
les
audio
chats,
quality
les
doesn't allow for a good
extraterritoriales.
interpretation.
Est-ce que vous n'avez pas les pouvoirs, je ne sais pas si c'est le bon terme,
Do
de
you have the
récupérer les
authority
textos qui ont été effacés?
to get
comment est-ce que ça marche
some of the text
exactement?
messages that were erased?
Encore une très bonne question, mais qu'est-ce que je peux
Answer?
dire, c'est qu'on était
Good
dans le
question.
milieu de faire une copie de toute l'information
We
qui
were
était sur le
going to
cellulaire de
copy
employé A.
all the
On a
information
vu que
of the cell phone of employee
que
A.
les messages étaient enlevés.
Then
So,
we
on a
saw
pris
that
un autre
messages
temps, on
were
a des
erased.
captures plus ou moins. Oui, on a
So
tous
we
les
were able
messages
to
qui ont
get
été
some
envoyés.
screen
Je vois,
captures
ils
only.
sont expliqués dans l'appendice B, je
I
crois,
think you will
du
have the
rapport.
information in Annex Schedule B.
C'est une grande question, là, mais comment
The
est-ce qu'on peut
interpreter is sorry,
s'assurer
the audio
que ce
quality doesn't allow for good
je pense que la
interpretation.
conseillère Kavanagh avait mentionné, évidemment, c'est qu'on
I
a
think
une
Councillor
offre
Kavanagh
de
mentioned
logement,
something.
ça c'est sûr et clair, mais ça va prendre quelques années avant qu'on se rattrape avec la
We're
crise
still
du
in a
logement
housing crisis.
qu'on a maintenant. Mais avez-vous des recommandations? Est-ce que EY va en faire?
Do you have any recommendation or EY will submit some recommendation?
Je vais la répondre
Answer?
en anglais, comme ça tout le monde
I will
peut
answer in the other language,
just
in
for
English.
those who may not have understood Councillor Plant's question, she's asking whether or not there are specific steps that can be taken to ensure this doesn't happen again. And the quick answer to that is you cannot. You cannot fully prevent the risk of fraud. It is why you saw that your external auditors had it as a risk on as part of the financial statement audits. You can never fully eliminate the risk of fraud. You can have collusion among staff members, and that's not something that you can fully prevent. You have training, you have monitoring, and if you have those elements in place, if you have a fraud risk assessment that helps you outline where those particular areas that are more susceptible to a fraud risk, you're able to add those particular controls into those particular elements. So those are the steps that we've outlined, whether it be in this report or in previous reports, that can help management minimize the risk of this from reoccurring. But the short answer is you cannot fully prevent it from reoccurring.
Merci. Et ma dernière question, est-ce qu'il y a un genre de...
Interpreter, sorry, the audio quality isn't allowed for good interpretation?
Pour la personne qui a signalé, la fraude qui avait
Is there
eu lieu,
anything that
parce
you will
que
do with the whistleblower?
je le vois souvent dans mon quartier, c'est pas facile parfois pour les gens
It's not
de
always easy
signaler des fraudes, des crimes,
to
etc. Il y a des
call
gens qui ont peur qu'il y ait des
in
répercussions
case of a
pour eux,
fraud
pour
because
leur
some
famille.
people are
Alors, je voulais
afraid
savoir
of
si on a
any
un
type
programme
of,
de ça à la ville pour leur dire un genre de
of
merci.
issues afterwards.
On n'a pas un programme comme tel, mais comme tu peux voir,
Answer? We don't have a program in such, but I did receive a message at the very beginning of the report. We're thanking everyone who are actually calling us, calling the fraud and waste hotline. So this is on my
Merci beaucoup,
first pages.
et merci aussi à EY pour le beau travail.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to EY also.
Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Natalie and gang. This is actually good. I think it's showing that what we do is catching people. I think the difference between some of the things in the past, you know, whether it was corporate cards or theft from tills by employees, a lot of the things we've seen in the past, it wasn't stealing from the most needy, and I think that's where we're really concerned. When I look at this list of examples, are they specific to this specific case? Because it's very concerning seeing Beacon Hill South and Pineview, where I know there has been, it's in my district, real concern about people losing homes or not being able to get in the area or stay in the area and are being forced further out from the village that they grew up in, lived in, and it's a big concern. So would those three be a part of this actual case?
Yes, all examples listed are specifically from this investigation.
Absolutely disgusting. So I assume when this goes forward to the police, obviously you fulfilled your role, you've identified and done terrific work. I have to assume if charges are pending, all that information about the individuals, the employees of the city that were involved, all this would, and I'm asking you to surmise, you wouldn't know yourself, I don't think I would want to respond, but this will all become very public, who this individual is that's created such oppression in my community.
I go back to my previous response,
I
which is that first of all, OPS needs to choose to take this on or not take this on. That's the first step, right? I think we all know they have a lot on their plate, and it just depends where this one's going to fall on their list of priorities. Then it depends on, I would presume, the findings of their investigation.
Yeah, for sure. And I know there's some people that sit on the police board, and while we can't interfere with making police decisions, this certainly would be one of the ones I would hope the police are staying tuned and listening to. I think we've seen other charges more frivolous, but this one here is pretty pointed. And last, I guess the lack of transparency, I think, from I know there's all rules around confidentiality about rates and different things like that. I think it's criminal what's happening with our motel rooms. I think that's insanity what's going on right now. People are living in squalor, and the amount we're paying as a municipality to have them in housing. I hope you do an audit on that, Madam Chair. That just, it's horrifying. Is there any opportunities based on this audit or suggestions that will go forward to say, I know they want to do competitive practices in different parts of the city, but I think we should have those rates out there, what we're paying. We're paying astronomical rates right now, and that's where we'll catch a lot of these things if the public gets to see it. Is there any opportunity for that, or is that left with the department?
With regards to us taking a look at those particular elements, we're always open to recommendations from members of committee and council if there's something they'd like us to add to our audit work plan. What I can say is we are currently underway is an audit of supportive housing. I won't quite touch these particular elements, obviously quite peripheral from that, but we are always open. With regards to publicizing rates, I will leave that one to management to respond to.
I appreciate that, and maybe the chair will take under consideration, especially the moteling rates. I can't express, I know how much they're getting paid, and people would be mind blown as taxpayers if they knew how much they're paying for one room with no amenities, no fridge, nothing. Riley knows it firsthand too. We're always hearing about they get nothing for the amount of money that we pay. Anyway, I digress. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Brockington, you asked to be on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to everyone. Madam Auditor General, if the employee had not contacted the fraud and waste hotline, would this matter have been detected?
Very bluntly, highly unlikely.
So to your earlier comment that we can't eliminate all fraud, which I agree with you, we can't eliminate all of it. We do have to mitigate as best we can. So, and I think you've taken some questions already, but I'm thinking about, you know, there was a police officer who took kickbacks from a towing company who, you know, was in a position that could make decisions and could, in the many regards, dictate who got what business. We have delegated authority all the time. We have sole employees that make decisions within the city. Have you reviewed like the chain of review that happens within the organization? So when employees are in positions where they have delegated authority to make decisions, have you confirmed that there is a check and balance system in place so that other senior supervisors review the merits of the decisions that are being taken?
Chair, I would say that the level of these transactions is much lower than the general delegated authority. I think some of the checks and balances that we were hoping to see is that monitoring process, which was not there. So I would say no, there's not all the proper checks and balances per se, in my opinion. That being said, there are, I believe, other checks and balances that management's indicating to us that are there that we did not dive into because they're more from a programmatic perspective and not necessarily those that we had to dive into specifically to either validate or disprove the allegations in question, which is why I've indicated that we are open to a future audit in this area.
I appreciate that. And, you know, my gut indicates that there is not widespread fraud within the city of Ottawa. I do think the city and its employees run the city well. And I believe the vast majority of people want to do their job well and abide by the law. But we have responsibility to ensure that where opportunities to stray exist, that we tidy things up, and we look to you for leadership and our senior staff to implement. So I appreciate that. So I just wanted to go back. There was a question about the landlord and whether or not they would be barred from future business, and you confirmed that. I just want to make sure whether it's the landlord, the individual, and not solely the company, because people can declare bankruptcy and start a new company, and you know, we discover years later that here's this landlord who's hiding behind an unnamed company and still at it again. But it's the actual individual who would be barred for future business with the city.
Chair, it is all of the above. The corporations and the individuals named that have been shared with management, those are what we encompass as the landlord. And when we indicated ceasing business, it means business with the corporations and the individuals, knowing it's very easy to open up another company, as you so mentioned.
Excellent. Okay, fair enough. We've seen that before with like paving companies the cities had a poor relationship with. They close up, and sure enough, they reopen under a different name. Just the status of employees A and B. Can I just get clarification what their legal status is with the city?
Chair, as disciplinary action is the responsibility of management, I will allow them to speak to that. It would be inappropriate for me to.
Okay. So is there a follow-up, or can I ask that now?
Well, we're going to have to go to Councillor Kavanaugh. I have a couple of questions, then we go to staff.
Okay, fair enough.
So then you can ask that for staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Kavanaugh?
Yeah, thank you. This came through the fraud and waste hotline. Can you remind us how many calls you get through the fraud and waste hotline?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. On average, we have been receiving roughly about 350 complaints a year. That being said, some of these, but there are additional reports. We tend to refer to them as similar in nature. If we include those, we're above 1,000 a year.
About 1,000 a year.
Above 1,000.
Above 1,000 a year. But the 350 is the number you investigate?
350 are the ones that we review.
Okay.
Then we triage them from there. Some instances, they may be not within the purview of our office. There may be insufficient information to investigate. And then there are others, obviously, than the rest we investigate, whether it be our office or in conjunction with management.
So getting something like this, I don't know if it has a, red flashing light on it because it was obviously huge. I'm just amazed at sorting through the ones that you get and to find something like this. Was that, like you obviously need a lot of staff to review these very carefully. What made you realize this was, super important, super fast?
Chair, we do have an internal process where we triage. We have a three-tiered level that helps us determine how quickly we get to specific items. When you start speaking to allegations of fraud, that obviously jumps straight to the top of our list and gets triaged immediately. My staff is aware of that, and then they bring me into the loop as soon as they've identified it as a level 1.
Thank you. And usually what happens when something like this happens, if there's other cases out there, it often happens that it takes one person to say something, like, for example, I hate to say assaults and things like that. When somebody has the courage to say it, then others come forward. So we could be expecting more if that were the case. Hopefully it's not. I wanted to know the impact on the residents who have taken, they're setting up their home in these places. And I don't know what impact it's going to have on them because they've obviously, not knowing any of this, did they pay higher rent or is it just on the city's end? And what will happen to them if if the landlords are banished from the list? Maybe this is a question for staff. I apologize. I just realized that. But I guess I'll refer it to them, but I'm wondering out loud about those that have taken up a home and are basically the victims.
Councillor, it's definitely a question for staff, but what I can say is the intent of our recommendation is not to have housing claimants out on the street. That is not, the recommendation is not meant to make people lose the roof over their heads in any way, shape, or form, which is why management's going to be working through a transition plan. Individuals have lease agreements. The city doesn't necessarily have the ability to terminate those lease agreements, but I'll let management go into more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have some questions of my own, just purely on the money part of this. So we understand that employee A was getting $100, $200, whatever, in total $22,000. But what we don't know is how much the landlord has been getting and for how many months, the total of that dollar figure, because the employee would just be getting a one-time, here's your bonus, but the landlord would be getting every month that extra amount, right? So do we have that number?
Chair, we have not calculated that. Again, I go back to where it's difficult to determine what that excess is. When we've given you examples as comparators to show you in some instances what a 3-bedroom average rent would have gone for versus what was entered into. But as I mentioned earlier, the programs are designed to allow with some flexibility to ensure that the city is able to house these clients as quickly as possible. So it's where do you put the barometer on what is deemed to be excessive? If I give the example of the $4,000 3-bedroom with an average, I think, market rate of just over $2,500, is it that $1,500 or is it $1,000? So we did not quantify that just because there is a lot of subjectivity to it.
I can appreciate that. I just want to say to councillors that the reality is this is a lot more money than the $22,000 that's quoted in this report. That's what we need to remember. The other thing is, can you share with us, and you're probably going to say no, but how much did it cost Ernst & Young to be employed to do all this work for us?
Well, there are a few factors. There was obviously Ernst & Young, and as I mentioned, we also had external counsel where, where feasible and not an independence issue. I utilized the city solicitor and his team to the best of our ability for some guidance, but then there was instances where that may have put us at jeopardy of our independence. And so we sought external legal counsel. I will say this was not cheap. I'm not going to go into the details, but this could have been a full other audit that we could have conducted in lieu.
Thank you for that. Again, to the point where we, we might have wanted to do another audit. Now we spent part of the auditing budget on this. And then the cost of policing. The investigation that police will go through will be significant because they won't be stopping just with employee A and B. They'll be looking much further into this and the cost of policing. I mean, you can say, well, it's all wrapped into the police budget every year, but then what are they not doing? Right? I mean, the costs of these things, I know they're not calculable in just in terms of a dollar figure, but we all still need to appreciate how expensive this type of thing is when there aren't checks and balances and people checking to make sure that things are done properly. As you can tell, I'm very frustrated. I read this report twice, and I would like to thank Ernst & Young for giving us specific email conversations between landlord and employee A and B. It's extremely helpful to see what types of things are going on with the employee talking about a vacation that they might take. The one particular email I want to highlight is the one where someone, and there are no names on these emails, but someone in the staff complement said, hey, this seems strange. The landlord is asking for a lot. We need to watch out for this. And I mean, and that went, without, no one looked into it after that. So are we able to find out who was on that email that did not act or react to that?
Chair, I've chosen to keep that information confidential for the reason of those staff members aren't the ones that are under investigation. So for that reason, I've chosen not to disclose that.
Well, Madam Auditor General, they're not under investigation by you, but they may be by us. Because the reality is staff were alerted that there was a problem and did not act. So, I mean, that's a question that we'll have for staff after this. Another question for the Auditor General. And I think this was described in French, but the next step with police. So after this meeting, you'll be meeting with the police. And so you indicated they will decide whether or not to take this, right? And Councillor Tierney was saying, I certainly hope they will. If they do, then what specifically will happen next?
Thank you for the question, Chair. As I'd mentioned, what I am currently at liberty to share with the Ottawa Police Service is the results of our investigation that have been made public. So I'll be meeting with them this afternoon to share the details of that. As I had also mentioned, my office is not at liberty to disclose the results of the information that we've obtained, such as that under summons. The individuals in question have exercised their protections under the various acts. And so as a result of that, I can only share that information if I'm compelled to do so in a criminal investigation. So the Ottawa Police Service will be required to summons my office to share that information. At such time, I will be extremely willing, a willing participant to share that information with them.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question I have is it our understanding that now that we all don't know who the landlord is, but somebody does, that landlord is aware enough now that they may reduce their rent to a reasonable amount? I mean, when I saw the $4,000 for the 3-bedroom apartment, obviously all you need to do is go on to rentals.com. All you need to do in terms of our staff at this city and check out what the average rent is. That would have been a significant alert. There are no apartments for $4,000 a month going on and being offered in that area. So now, what will happen next with the landlord? Say, okay, we can tell that that's highly inflated. It needs to go back down. Will that happen at all?
Chair, unfortunately, I'm not able to really speak to what those next steps will be from that perspective. I'm not the landlord, so I can't necessarily think about what that individual or individuals may be thinking upon the release of this particular report. Obviously, management's next step is to come up with a transition plan to in the future cease business with this group of individuals. Speaking back to your comment with regards to, all staff had to do was review kind of the market conditions. That is part of staff's requirement. So that is a process step that is there. The city has a tool in which, and that's how we came up with these particular numbers. We leveraged the city's tool to determine what's a low end of rent, what's the average, what's the high end for that particular area, to see what a caseworker would have seen had they taken that step. So that is part of the process. That is management's expectation, is that that step is occurring.
Okay, thank you. My one last question is just simply on the process. There's an email in there where the staff member indicates, well, I will try to get you a higher rent, and you're going to get me fired. That was the least of that employee's concerns at that moment, I might say. But I'm going to have to try to get you this, right? That getting them the higher rent, that meant that employee would have to go to some other employee or group or negotiating. Do you understand that process to say that is also where it broke down, that even though they were going to someone else, whoever that someone else would be, or to a group, that even then there was not a recognition that something was wrong?
So my interpretation of that particular message between the landlord and employee A is they are speaking with regards to what level of benefit employee A will be able to get for that one or two or three individuals that would result in an overall full, 2-3 lease agreements for the 2 or 3 bedroom apartment.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll ask staff what the process is when we get to those questions. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, hands up for questions to staff. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a few questions for probably finance staff and then for social services staff. So my first question is, the process has been well explained that we will go, that the Auditor General has a meeting with the Ottawa Police Services. They will then decide whether or not to undertake a criminal investigation. If there were to be a criminal investigation undertaken, would the city then try to recover the lost funds through a civil lawsuit?
Chair, perhaps I can answer that question first. The city will cooperate fully. As you've heard from the Auditor General, she's meeting with the Ottawa Police Service this afternoon. I'll be in attendance at that meeting. The city will cooperate fully with any police investigation and any resulting criminal proceeding that may occur. The city will also examine all civil remedies that are available to it and will pursue those accordingly, although respecting any police investigation and any criminal proceedings that may ensue. The city would also welcome the landlord in question preemptively returning public funds that have been identified through the Auditor General's report today.
Sorry, could you repeat the last line?
In addition to the criminal, civil, and other remedies that may be pursued, in light of the Auditor General's findings in relation to a landlord in our community, the city would welcome that landlord preemptively returning public monies that are owed to the city.
Councillor Carr, is it possible for senior staff to move so that we can see you? It's actually, I can't actually see who wants to speak either, but just in terms of us speaking to the backs of chairs, I'm not sure who would be the main questions, but there are 3 seats there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. My second question is to staff with respect to the current status of the fraud and risk assessment, where we are, who the owner of the fraud and risk assessment are, what the engagement is with the different areas of responsibility within the corporation.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. We have an overall enterprise risk assessment that is owned by the City Manager's Office. When we look back at the audit, through the Auditor General's review of our enterprise risk assessment, there were 7 recommendations that came out of that. 6 of those recommendations were directed at staff or management to implement, and 1 of those recommendations was for the OAG. I can tell you that staff have implemented 6 of those recommendations. We have 1 recommendation of which the full, I'm going to say, gambit of that will be implemented by the end of the year. When you look at the management response in that recommendation, we had committed to an implementation plan, and we met the timelines with respect to that. We're doing some additional analysis with each of the departments to really hone in on what that risk is, and then developing a more broader plan in terms of addressing those particular issues as we see them.
Thank you. And the governance table for the enhanced risk assessment would fall where?
It falls in my office.
Okay, excellent. But when when you bring forward the completed fraud risk assessment, where will it be presented? Sorry.
It will come to Finance and Corporate Services as a report back.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, I guess, would be probably for Clara. Obviously, it was of interest to me to see the rental rates in the Herongate Ridgemont area, being at 4,000. We do track AMR, obviously, within social services. So why were there no checks and balances with respect to the market rents that were being offered, the rents that were being offered in the rental agreement against AMR, which I know you do track?
Thank you for the question, Chair. First, I'll just start by saying that, as you can imagine, I was and our team was horrified when we were told by the governor, by the Auditor General of this investigation. We took action right away within the context of what we could. We were asked to be very discreet. I can assure you that all dealings with this landlord have ceased, with exception to the people who are currently housed, and I'll be prepared to answer questions in more detail on that. The employee in question is no longer an employee of the City of Ottawa. And we have initiated a compliance both procedural and finance review with financial services leading that of our portable benefits process at the enhanced benefits level. So the rapid rehousing team who works out of the physical distancing centers. To answer that specific question, staff are absolutely asked to use what we call a rent scraping tool. It's a digital tool that we use that staff use to compare rents across neighborhoods in Ottawa to ensure that rents are within a range. You can imagine that the range changes almost daily. For instance, a range for a 1-bedroom today is between 1,200 to 4,000, depending on the neighborhood. So that tool is very important for staff. And as part of the mitigation strategies going forward, we're also going to be introducing an additional tool for staff to use that is called VTAX, and it is a tool that is maintained by the provincial government with municipal assistance that enables staff to have access to actual data about the number of bedrooms that actually exist in a dwelling, for instance, to ensure that there's validity in what landlords are presenting as available units in a particular dwelling. So those are some examples.
Thank you very much. Just, I know I had asked a question to the Auditor General, and she said it was a wide range of programs. So in this investigation that took place, were all programs impacted, like the large family supplement, the enhanced benefit allowance, the COB? Were all of these impacted by the decisions of the employee?
Chair, the portable housing benefit program contains, as you just mentioned, several different benefits. The benefits chiefly in question were the enhanced housing benefit. So that's the housing benefit that we initiated with the Alliance to End Homelessness to rapidly move people out of the PDCs. It also includes the COB, the Canada-Ontario Housing Agreement benefit, which is a provincial federal housing benefit that was initiated as part of the National Housing Strategy a couple of years ago. And then we also have at the municipal level, we initiated an in-house, what we call an in-house COB, which is a municipally driven benefit that mirrors COB to try and, again, help people move out of shelter. So those three are the primary under question here.
Okay, so in some cases, there's multiple levers being applied, and so that was what was happening. I know oftentimes in community and social services, we've discussed over the past couple of years, having a more systems-focused approach to housing and homelessness files where we can follow clients throughout the whole cycle as opposed to sort of program-based, which has happened largely as new programs get introduced. Do you think the impact of having more of a systems-based approach would have helped to prevent this?
Chair, it's an interesting question because ultimately a housing benefit is a benefit that someone receives in order to move into and help them pay the cost of a rental unit in the private market. Once they move, we do initial follow-up. So we have a case management, the housing support worker does initial follow-up to ensure that everything is going as planned for the tenant. And then it becomes a tenant-landlord relationship. This is not a supportive housing system. This is literally a citizen looking for a rental unit, and our staff are assisting them with where there are rental units available, that kind of information, explaining the systems and how the systems work, and the other benefits that may be or may not be available to them, and then ensuring landlords also have the similar information about our processes. Ultimately, when they rent, then it becomes a landlord-tenant relationship, and we are not part of that system per se.
Okay, thanks. So on that whole tenant-landlord piece, I noted in the report that the agent, employee A, was not supposed to be negotiating rental agreements. And I know that when we approved that program last year, the enhanced benefit allowance, I don't have the name exactly right, sorry, that we also, you mentioned Alliance to End Homelessness, we brought in an employee there as well to help locate private market rentals as well that we could place people in. And I had thought that program had sort of ceased because we'd run out of money and we'd also run out of places available in the private market. Are there lessons learned from, what lessons can be applied in terms of how we work with private market landlords other than what's in the report? Like, is there anything else that we're taking back? Because, we have a shortage of housing and we need to use that private market. Is there anything else that you would see that we could improve upon there?
Chair, I'd have to think that through a bit more. There is, to a previous question, there is the reality, unfortunately, that this is a very tough housing market, and it is a capitalist housing market. And when a city worker calls a landlord to say, would you rent to person A? When it's the city of Ottawa calling, there's a reaction usually on behalf of landlords. And often we do see a phenomenon. One of the lessons learned through the EHAB, the housing benefit, the one that you're talking about, the emergency housing benefit, was that, yes, there were some landlords that were inflating a little bit. And so back to this scenario, what the team would do is go back to the tools that they have, the scraping tools. they have their peers and they would look at the reasonableness to their best ability of what this landlord is asking. That didn't occur in this case. And so one of the most horrifying things to me is that here we have one staff person acting unethically and fraudulently for their own benefit and putting into question the amazing work done by, at any one time, up to 11 housing support workers who are all doing the right thing and housing over 600 people in the middle of a housing crisis and homelessness crisis. Not in any way to take away from it what we have to learn from this particular experience, and we agree with all of the recommendations from the Auditor General, and have actioned most of them already or are in process of actioning them. But I can take back that question in terms of the assessment of the enhanced housing benefit and what else the team learned.
Thank you. And you mentioned, housing 600 people. Had there not been these overpayments that were made, how many additional units do you think would have been made available, or how many additional families or individuals would have been helped had we not had these overpayments? Is there any way to estimate that?
Chair, not really. We don't have that information. And ultimately what occurred was that the maximum housing benefit available and the guidelines to achieve that maximum housing benefit were followed correctly. So there were questions earlier as well in terms of a lack of monitoring. We do have monitoring. What we do have is separation of duties. So at the front end, the housing caseworker is in charge of doing the initial assessment and eligibility assessment of that person, whether or not they're eligible to receive a portable housing benefit. And then once they do their work to actually confirm, and there's a list, I can read them out if required, but there's a list of documents and checks and balances that have to be met. Then they help the person find housing. So that's when they use the tools available to them to seek housing across the city that may or may not be appropriate for that particular person. To the assessment, that assessment then is done by the actual client and whether or not they're going to accept the choices. Once the contract or the assessment is complete and a contract is ready to be signed between the client and a prospective tenant, then that moves to our rent supplement office. Our rent supplement office has further checks and balances and verifications available, processes that they follow, monitoring processes that they follow, and all payments go out through the housing supplement office that is aligned with financial services.
Okay, thank you very much. My primary concerns right now remain with what's going to happen to the tenants and finding housing for them, but I'm going to leave that up to somebody else to ask that question. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carrick. Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to start off by acknowledging that the actions of these two city employees by no means reflect on all of the other employees in the city of Ottawa. And I know it's been said, but I think it should be said again. In no way is this committee going after the hardworking and honest city employees that serve our community every day. But I do want to start with the failure of the supervisor who was originally notified that the landlord was trying to, and I'm going to quote here, pitch clients and housing workers against each other, as the landlord repeatedly informed me that the landlord has other housing workers who would get the landlord the full amount, so I should do the same if I want my clients housed. Do we have a systemic problem that we've been able to identify through this? And if we do have one, what training are we providing to employees and supervisors to this type of behavior? How are we going to avoid it in the future?
Thank you, Chair. We don't believe we have a systemic problem. I do believe that there ought to have been more appropriate supervision, and we agree with that. So we are implementing additional training. So the training would include training for management and supervisors of the processes and procedures that staff have to follow. We are introducing case review, so weekly case reviews where the supervisor meets together with housing support workers to review. We've increased the a supervisor on site, so an additional staffing on site. We've also increased a program coordinator at the rent supplement office to assist with dealing with addressing the volume so that more attention to monitoring and more detailed monitoring could be put into place. We're verifying with staff the communication to bring forward issues if they're not receiving action from their supervisor, that they are absolutely within their right to go to management and that it's a safe thing to do that, to bring it to management right away. We're also introducing an anonymous, what normally would be called an anonymous input box or an anonymous input channel where any staff can come directly to management with any concerns whatsoever they might have. We are also deeply concerned that there wasn't the kinds of supervision at the front line that there ought to have been. And we are right now just following the available disciplinary procedures under the union agreements right now.
Thank you very much for that response. Is the supervisor in question still in their role, and have they been given increased training to ensure that if they are still exercising their duties in the department, that they are fully aware that this is something we now have to watch for or should have been watching for originally?
Chair, at this time, the supervisor in question is on leave for other reasons. Notwithstanding that, all supervisors, yes, will receive enhanced training and a full review of all the requirements of the job.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read at the bottom of, I believe it's page 29 of the E&Y report. When we interviewed employee A, they described that they had also assisted the landlord with finding tenants for units in Barrie, and that this message was referencing payment, and the text in question is further up on the page, that this message was referencing payments related to both units in Barrie and units in the city of Ottawa. And E&Y goes on to describe that the scope of their work was restricted to the city of Ottawa. Have we connected with our partners in Barrie to let them know that they too may have been subsidizing tenant units above market value?
Chair, at this time, we have not because of the confidential nature of the investigation, but it is something that we will do as a next step.
Thank you very much. And I think that's important because perhaps we don't have a systemic issue at the city of Ottawa, and I'm hoping this is the only employee that we have this particular issue with, but I think that's something that we should communicate to our municipal partners. The Auditor General in her presentation referenced a 2022 enterprise risk management audit that, from my understanding, at least recommendation number 6 has yet to be completed. Could we talk a little bit about the delay, why there's a delay, and although it may not have solved the issue that we're talking about today, it would have been a tool in our toolbox?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. So as I had mentioned in that audit, there were 7 recommendations, 6 of which for management and 1 was for the OAG. So all have been completed. The one that is outstanding, we had agreed and recommended that we do an implementation plan. We've met the timeline in the management response with respect to that. We're doing initial and additional analysis with respect to the information that's come back from each of the departments to make sure that we're clearly highlighting what the fraud risks are, where they are, and what we need to do to address those if there's additional work that we need to address. At a minimum, education will be required. So what we will be doing is wrapping that up at the end of the year and then putting a plan in place to address those that will go out to each of the departments to action.
Thank you very much. I'll leave it there for now, Chair, so our colleagues can ask a few of their questions, but I might get back on the list.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to clarify with Clara that this is a a combination of federal and provincial money for these programs. Is that correct?
Chair, the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit is a benefit we receive from the province, but it's part of a national housing strategy. And it's a benefit that is essentially a partnership between the federal and provincial governments. So you could consider that a combined benefit. The other benefit, the enhanced housing benefit, is a municipal benefit that we created.
Does the provincial or the federal government have any requirements for your area to track the money and do risk assessments or monitor?
Chair, yes, thanks for that question. So the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit is a benefit that we administer on behalf of the province. There are three layers when administering that benefit. So the initial layer is the housing support worker, as I mentioned, that does the work with the client, does the initial assessment, gathers all of the documentation required to verify that assessment, verifies that this is a viable eligibility situation. Then our rent supplement office actually administers the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. They send an offer to apply to the tenant. Then the tenant, again, with the rent supplement office, fills out all the documentation. They verify that all the documentation is in place. They verify the landlord agreement. Then they send that package to the province. The province then works from that point forward directly with the tenant. So the province actually has purview over the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefits right now that we have referred to them.
So in a case like this where the worker inflates the rental cost for a property, you're telling us that there is levels of review, including at other levels of government of that contract, and yet it was still approved?
Chair, yes, there's a level of review that occurs again at the front line with the housing support worker that ought to have been reviewed with the housing support worker. Then there's a review by our rent supplement team, and they are the ones that administer a series of housing programs, including the rent supplement program. And they have a series of protocols and monitoring that is followed. And then we have requirements from the province for the COB, Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, and we fulfill those requirements as required with the province.
Thank you. And did I hear you mention earlier that although the Auditor General had said that housing does its own checks and bills on this particular program, but did I hear you say earlier that it's actually affiliated with our finance department?
Chair, yes. The all payments for any housing benefit, all of them go through our rent supplement office. The rent supplement office has the payment processes in place and all the protocols in place that have been verified with, and they work with financial services, of course, through procurement to conduct that business.
So going back to this example of where, an inflated rent, would they actually be checking that, or are they just checking to make sure that box A, B, and C is ticked and issue the check?
Chair, they would be ensuring that all the requirements for the program are met before signing off to facilitate the payments. The reasonableness of verifying whether or not a landlord is asking too much for rent is done at the front line, at the housing caseworker level, at the supervisor level, and we're going to introduce a program management oversight that would happen regularly to ensure that the level of reasonableness is being applied. But that is really done more at the initial steps with the client and with the prospective landlord.
So for the Auditor General to report back that she found the area lacking in monitoring programs, no real fraud detection effort, or risk assessment and no supervision of the housing benefit program. You're disputing that by saying that you do have monitoring programs and supervision and everything she says that's not there? Is there a difference in opinion here that I'm detecting?
Chair, I believe that the clarification is that the scope of investigation was very small in terms of the portable housing benefits in question that the particular staff was administering. And what we're saying is, in addition to that, there's a second layer of monitoring that, yes, does exist. So monitoring does exist. We do accept the finding that more training needs to be put in place, a more formalized training. So the team is formalizing a training manual with all of the required training elements documented, a training checklist for staff documented. And also in monitoring, we also agree that more monitoring at the supervisory level, management level of staff's work and staff's decision-making is also required. So we're agreeing with the Auditor General, and then the clarification is that when you look at the entire program, yes, there are checks and balances in place. And certainly from a financial and procurement process, we follow all the city's policies and procedures.
I wonder if I might just add something to that, just in the sense of what Ms. Ferreira is speaking about is really putting an enhanced layer of monitoring in place. And this is a very interesting situation in the sense that there are requirements set out by the province in terms of, I'm going to say, rental top out amounts. So sort of, where you're going to fit that rent in between. And in this case, I think the rent fit in between those numbers. So what Ms. Briere is talking about is how do we test some of that as we're giving out these benefits to make sure that this is not occurring, and that's what's going to be applied in future.
Thank you for distinguishing that point. So then let's talk about that for a second. So if the range is 1,500 to 4,000, I'm assuming that the documentation the employee looks at has some criteria as to what makes 1,500 versus 4,000. That, it's different end of town. It's, includes a gym in the facility or whatever. There must be some criteria to make that band. It can't just be here. You can approve anything between 1,500 and 4,000. Doesn't matter if it's the same apartment side by side in a building. Which is it?
So, Chair, the clarification is that there's a maximum benefit that someone can receive, and at no time that anyone received more than they were entitled to receive. So that benefit goes with the tenant, it's portable. They use that to help reduce the rent costs. When our team is working with tenants to find housing, they present a range of options to the tenant and some to the client. And sometimes the client brings their own options, and they may very well decide to live in a particular area of town that we would say, well, that's a little more expensive. Maybe you should live in that area of town. That's their decision. Our staff should not be, and again, we value the auditor's work. Our staff should never be negotiating rents with landlords. They are to present a range of options to the client, and it's up to the client to determine where they want to live. But the benefit is not going to reach beyond the maximum. Now, there is work that the housing support workers should be doing with that client to say, you know what, you're paying too much. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this, and let's work through potentially some other scenarios of more reasonable rents. That work should happen. Ultimately, though, it's the client's decision whether or not they take up that relationship with that particular landlord and pay that rent. But our maximum will never be exceeded and has not been exceeded.
So, based on what you're saying, I'm going to ask that then that you would support and welcome with open arms a direction from this committee or council to have the AG take a broader look at this program area and the issuance of checks to make sure that there are proper monitoring and risk assessment being done?
That's a direction you're proposing. Do you have a comment on that, Madam Auditor General?
Chair, as always, we are always open to areas that members of committee or council are interested in us taking a look at. We would take that direction as a recommendation, and we review our work plan to see whether or not it's something that we can do and what would need to fall off of the current work plan to achieve that.
Okay, Councillor Hubley, is that okay?
Yeah, if that's her answer. And I want to make sure that Clara supports that too, if that is what comes forward. My last question, Chair, is I don't think it would be to Clara. I think it might be to either the city manager or legal staff. And that is along the lines of what I was asking the AG is there any effort being made to make the taxpayer whole in this? I think the Solicitor General talked about the landlord volunteering to pay back the money. If the landlord chooses not to, are we going to pursue legal remedies for that? And what about the employees that profited from that exchange? Are they going to pay the taxpayer back? Is there going to be a legal effort to make sure that the taxpayer gets paid back here? I'd like some assurances on that.
Chair, the city will cooperate with any police investigation and of course pursue any civil remedies that are available. With respect to the employees, the city has terminated the employee. That's the most significant tool that management has as the employer vis-a-vis an employee. So hopefully that responds to the councillor's inquiry.
No, I'm sorry, with all due respect, it's not a response. The police are not going to ask the landlord to pay back the taxpayer. We, as the city, have to do that. We are the stewards of the tax dollar. And in this case, some got abused, if I'll use that term. So I'm wondering, will you as a solicitor take legal action to ensure that the landlord does pay back any extra funds? And are we going to, when the police investigation is done, can we consider going after the employees to be reimbursed for the vacation money that was quoted in the report?
Counselor, if you don't mind, I'm just going to step in here and Stuart can add as I make my comments. I think first and foremost, as the Auditor General has said, there is a very important meeting that is happening at 2 p.m. today with the Ottawa Police Services. We have all been restricted in terms of confidentiality to deal with this particular issue until the matter was tabled today. But I can assure you that we will take every avenue available to the city to ensure that the city is reimbursed by any monies that are due back to us. We will do that. We do need the advice and oversight of the Ottawa Police Service to determine whether they're going to take the case on and what the next step is, and we will go from there. But you do have my assurance.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that a lot. That's all my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff for their quick action to management. This is very serious and you've treated it that way, and I appreciate that. I just want to clarify, both employees involved were let go. Is that correct?
One employee was terminated. The second employer, we were going down that same avenue and they decided to resign from their position. So they are no longer with the city.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. I was asking about residents and what their fate is. They're already established. These are people who consider that they're in a home and with plans to stay, and they're caught in the middle in this whole thing. And I'm sure they're going to be shocked when they find out what's been going on. What is their fate?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for that important question. And you'll note in the Auditor General's report that we agreed and that we are going to be putting in place transition plans with each person that we're aware of. So we're aware of 31 individuals in a rental relationship. Each of those individuals has a different lease arrangement. So respecting the timing of the lease arrangements. And where we can, yes, we're going to approach the landlord to take a first step to reduce the rent. If that's not possible, then we will be working individual with each tenant to not renew the rental agreement with that particular landlord. So each tenant is receiving notice letters that their housing allowance would not be renewed after that particular lease arrangement. A dedicated case management team is being put into place to work with each individual to ensure that they have options, again, put in front of them to seek other, if they choose to seek other living arrangements, that we can support them in doing that. We are also required, because some of the agreements were with the COB, the provincial COB, so we're going to be notifying the province following this meeting as well to identify who under the provincial COB might be required, where intervention may be required, but that's a provincial decision. Ultimately, the principle here, and I believe the Auditor General also mentioned it, is we're going to be accelerating an end to those agreements in any way we can, however, respecting the need of people to remain housed. And so we're avoiding return to homelessness is our #1 priority. And then the second is, of course, ending all business with the landlord.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Will that be true also? Are we going to look into our arrangements with motels as well? There's always been concern about that.
Chair, motels is not the purview of this investigation, but we do appreciate the question. We are determined in Community Social Services to stop using motels for homelessness. As you know, the housing situation is such that we do not have a choice. And so we continue to struggle, in fact, to find hotel rooms for especially homeless families. We have a situation now where we're seeing more than ever homeless families. We're competing with IRCC for hotels. Right now it's there's a situation where we don't have lots of choices. And that's unfortunately the situation we find ourselves in. However, we have been putting in, as you know, over the last year, several initiatives to try and mitigate that. So we opened the Corkstown Family Shelter Facility. We moved families out of hotels. We're initiating, as you well know, steps to create a system for newcomer and migrant individuals, and I hope to include families at some point, so that we put that burden on the federal government and no longer on the provincial government, but more importantly, get out of a system of motels for people in general.
Just in terms of it being relevant, because I think Councillor Kavanaugh's point is that if there's concern right now by everybody that there is a problem here, we maybe aren't monitoring that well. Is it possible that there was also a problem with hotel? We talk about how much the hotel costs have gone up. Would you welcome somebody, and I'm sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth, but would you welcome the Auditor General also looking into that?
Chair, we would always welcome a third-party review of any of the systems where that could point to ways of improving our systems and our work.
Thank you, Chair. Just remind us, in terms of the housing list, the affordable housing list, these are all people that were on it. And you said there was 31 individuals that were affected. How many do we place in the private sector market? Roughly. I don't expect you to have the number right there, but. I mean, compared to Ottawa Community Housing, for example.
Chair, I unfortunately don't have the 2024 number, but in 2023, there were 1,216 households placed with various housing benefits.
Okay, I just want to get an idea of the fraction of this. But in terms of the process that has led to this, can you clarify when dealing with Ottawa Community Housing, I just want people to know that that is set and that it's not, there's no variances with Ottawa Community Housing.
Chair, I can verify that that would be out of scope.
Okay, just wanted to clarify so that people understand that there's different streams and that we're just short of housing, and that's why we have to go to the private sector, because we don't have enough nonprofit affordable housing available. But I know we're desperately working on it, and I appreciate the effort of management on that level. And thank you again.
Thank you. Councillor Hill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report. I appreciate the efforts to manage our internal fraud controls. My question for staff, how confident are you going forward that we will be able to continue our housing programming at a fair value to our taxpayers?
Chair, as I said, we're open and anxious to put in additional training, monitoring, and other controls, especially at the front end. And with those in place, we would be confident that the taxpayer is getting the best value in terms of the housing benefits that are applied to help people find housing within a very difficult housing market with fluctuating rents and fluctuating rent rates across the city.
Are there further internal fraud control mitigations that you will be implementing that will supplement the Auditor General's recommendations?
Chair, as I mentioned, we've initiated separately a financial compliance audit that Cyril's team is leading. And that's the beginning to help us find any other gaps that might exist across our processes. I mentioned additional monitoring processes with management, supervisors at those levels, and also training for staff. Training for staff is probably the biggest factor to mitigate the type of behaviors that we're seeing now, in addition to proper monitoring in terms of supervisor monitoring. So we're putting all of those pieces in place. But as I said, we're undergoing a financial compliance audit. I think that's going to highlight any other areas where we might need to do more.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kitts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. How is that lack of aggregated data going to be addressed?
So thanks for that question. The team had already initiated digitization of all our files, which is in process. So the information that was requested by the Auditor General is all available. It's all in manual form. And we agree that digitization is required because it would give us quicker access to the information for the purposes of monitoring and supervision, and also to compare files more readily, as was noted by the Auditor General. The team is rolling out what they call, with the Dynamics 365 tool, a rent supplement. It's a rent supplement model. They're going to roll out a second version. And we'll have a digitization strategy in place by the first quarter of 2025.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to hearing more about that. once complete. This came through fraud and waste, which, yes, demonstrates its value and the value of the Auditor General. But I wonder why it came to that, and why staff that were being alerted to this were not escalating it. I know you said there's training that's required. In my view, this isn't exactly nuanced wrongdoing. So, you know, in your view, being privy to the details, what do you think went wrong here?
Chair, we acknowledge that there should have been tighter supervision and the kind of support that staff require to make assessments of what's reasonable in terms of rent. So that should have happened. It didn't happen, and we're going to fix that. In terms of my assessment is that we had at one time 10 housing caseworkers that were finding reasonable housing for people over a year, almost a year, and they were doing it correctly. I feel that this was one person taking advantage of their role and their relationships with a particular landlord. And we will do everything we can as management to assess, to ensure that that's the case and fix what went wrong here.
Okay, thank you for that. Kind of from that answered question for the city manager, we've heard, you know, there's no assumption that this is a systemic issue. How concerned are you about this? And do you think this was a one-off or potentially tip of the iceberg?
Well, I can tell you that I have zero tolerance for this type of behavior in the city. It is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to any of council nor our taxpayers here. I think in this situation, and actually, you know, the Auditor General knows that I am very supportive of the fraud and waste utility. It worked. It was used and it worked. And that's why we have it. I don't believe that this is a pervasive issue. I think it is related to one staff taking unfortunate advantage of the situation and colluding with a landlord in the private sector. And again, it is unacceptable.
Okay, thank you. Just a closing comment. I think as we leverage as many avenues as possible to deal with the housing crisis, and appreciating that we need to work quickly, you know, I think we can't get sloppy. We need to maintain our checks and balances and not give up the keys to the car for others to drive, because there's a lot of money flowing through this department, with hopefully more to come. And obviously every dollar is precious. I know that you know that. So I look forward to the actions that will flow through this. Thank you.
Councillor Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to go back to the exchange that I had earlier with the city manager about the 2022 enterprise risk management audit. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. All of the recommendations in that report, all 7, have been completed?
What I had said was that 6 of the recommendations were management. Of those, 5 are 100% complete. There is 1 in which the management response, we had indicated we would put an implementation plan together. That is done, so we have met that requirement. However, there is still work outstanding with respect to the fraud risk assessment across the corporation. We've gathered all the data, so we put our implementation plan to gather that data. We're now doing that analysis to determine what the next steps are. So that will come and that work will be done by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you very much, and I apologize for not catching that earlier. Madam Chair, if I may, I have a motion that I'd like to read in and happy to answer any questions on it. So I'll ask the clerk to put that up on the screen. Whereas the Office of the Auditor General provided an audit on enterprise risk to the city in June 2022, and whereas this audit found that there were a number of opportunities to improve and strengthen current risk management practices across the city, and whereas some of these improvements could help identify and mitigate the risks of fraud and corruption within the city, And whereas in response to the audit, staff provided Q4 of 2023 as the date before which all audit recommendations would be resolved. And whereas some audit recommendations remain unresolved, therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to provide an update on the status of recommendations identified in the OAG audit on enterprise risk management, and be it further resolved that this update include a detailed review of each audit recommendation, including its current completion status, and be it further resolved that in the event that any audit recommendations remain incomplete, staff be directed to provide explanations as to why the self-imposed timelines for completion have been missed. And be it further resolved that any incomplete audit recommendations, staff provide a new completion timelines. And be it further resolved that this update be provided during the February 2025 meeting of the Audit Committee. I can appreciate that you're pulling this together, but I would say that based on what we're discussing here today, an update would be warranted, and I would appreciate if staff could bring that forward, but happy to answer any questions or address any concerns that the committee may have, Madam Chair.
Any comment by the Auditor General or staff on this motion before I ask committee members? Auditor General?
Chair, just confirming that is directed to staff and not to my office.
Yes, towards staff. Thank you, Chair.
And City Manager?
We're happy to support that.
Any comments or questions on this motion? All right, so can we just carry this motion then, and then we'll go back to the other? Because we just have to receive the report, but all right, no comments, questions. Okay, is this carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, so Vice Chair Brown, do you have any other further questions to staff?
No, thank you, Chair.
All right, I have a question from Councillor Lowe, whose voice is not great, and he simply just wants me to ask for his understanding how we will be updated as this case progresses if the police do take it up. What format will that come through? This committee, another committee, memos? How will we be updated as the case progresses?
Chair, I don't think we're going to be privy to that. I think that's up to OPS to determine how they choose to, again, whether or not they choose to take this on, and then they will be publicizing the results of their investigation. I'm sure they'll inform us at about that particular time, but I do believe once it's communicated to them, that is out of our hands.
Okay, so that and media. Is that how we see that happening?
Well, Chair, to the extent that I can, I will certainly share with this committee and members of council any updates that I'm allowed to share within the confines of the law.
Okay, very much appreciated. That will be great. Thank you. I have a few questions. So the comment that the rent range is $1,500 to $4,000. I mean, to me, when I think about $4,000 a month rent for an apartment, I think that's much more than many mortgage payments. That seems unrealistic that $4,000 a month would be a rent payment. What is the possibility, and this comment was made earlier, that the city has actually contributed to that number growing as high as 4,000, that our processes here at the city allowing rents to go that high has increased rents across the city?
Chair, we work with a certain group of clients, and I could not comment on what impact our program has beyond the 160 people we serve through the enhanced housing benefit.
Fair enough. I would just suggest to you that in your training to staff, you might want to mention to them that their actions do have consequences beyond their actions, because that is a reality. One landlord sees that somebody's getting a $4,000 a month rent, says, hey, that's what we should set ours at now. This is real. So I would hope that city staff realize that their job is important in helping people, but it's also important that it's setting rental rates across the city. The other question I have is this program oversight. Do we imagine that would require a new staff member or additional funds?
Chair, no, we believe that we can add the appropriate level of enhanced oversight and training. and supervision within existing resources.
Okay, thank you for that. My last question is more of a concern that I certainly have. So we are constantly asking the federal and provincial governments for more money, saying, we don't have enough money. You need to give us more money. And then this report comes out. We'll see how far it goes or what happens with police and everything else. And the, headline is that, mismanagement of provincial funds, of tax dollars, whatever that looks like. And then we go to the provincial and federal governments again and say, oh, can we have more money now as well? How much do you think this would put other funding requests or grant applications at risk?
Chair, it's hard for me to comment on something like that. In the grand scale of things, our funding and including these benefits serve more than 20,000 people in any one year across this city. We believe that this was an isolated incident, one staff behaving badly. We have zero tolerance for this behavior, so we will continue to do our investigation now as management to ensure that it will not happen again and that we put the proper mechanisms in place within our ability to do that. But as the Auditor General herself stated, eliminating any case of fraud is impossible. We have to do our best to put in place all of the mechanisms from a management perspective and operational perspective that we can to avoid it and mitigate that. I believe that's as much as I can say on this topic.
Okay, well, I would certainly hope that you're right, that this is isolated. I find it very hard to believe that that is the case. I think landlords, one landlord doing this is probably not the case. It's probably more than one landlord. The fact that we have Barrie associated with, this is probably something that's happening in other municipalities. I mean, obviously, this is a learning opportunity for everyone. I hope that, all that we put in place going forward fixes it. And I hope that this is an isolated incident. I find that difficult to believe that it will be. I don't see any other hands up or comments or questions. So the actual motion for this is simply that we have to receive this report. So that the Audit Committee receive the investigation report and recommend that Council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, thank you to everybody. In-camera items, I don't see any. We didn't need to. Notices of motion, are there any notices of motion? No, seeing none. Inquiries, any inquiries? Any other business? All right, this meeting is adjourned and you will get a notice of when we'll have another meeting. We don't know that date yet. We are adjourned.